Chapter 1, Prologue, Thunderstruck. Chapter 1, Prologue, Thunderstruck. Lightning flashed across the cloudy night sky, closely followed by the deep, earth-shaking rumble of thunder. Torrential rains descended upon the earth, leaving nothing dry in its wake. Gale-force winds howled hauntingly beautifully, like a choir of sirens luring poor sailors to their demise. "Mommy, Daddy." The frantic voice of a small male child rang throughout the symphony of the night, quickly drowned out by the sounds of nature. The child, seemingly around 5 years old, ran through the overwhelming rain, barely managing to avoid thick tree trunks in the poor visibility of the forest he was now lost in. His innocent onyx eyes were wide and filled with panic. He had been searching for his parents for the entirety of the day and had no success finding them. He had searched everywhere in his home village, every possible venue they usually frequented, only to find that the hosts held no knowledge of them. He even went to the local wizard guild, Drake Nakalite, which he knew they were a part of, with no success. It almost seemed as if the ground had come up and swallowed them whole, erasing their existence completely. That drove him to his current predicament. His home village stood right next to one of the most mysterious and beautiful forests in Fiore, flanked on the north side by an immense mountain range. He distinctly remembered his father telling him about his periodical visits to the forest. Mezzo, he called it. There were times when his mother would accompany his father, leaving him in the care of the neighbors. He had always wanted to go, but they adamantly refused, saying that the forest was too dangerous for a child his age. That didn't matter anymore. Somewhere in the back of his mind he was aware that he had blatantly disobeyed his parents, and that if he were found, they would punish him severely. But he didn't care. His parents had disappeared without letting him know. Hell, they did not even wake him up. Whenever they left to their excursions, they would tell him to walk over to the neighbors and stay there. But this time, they didn't even do that. And that was what had worried him. His father had told him stories of the wildlife residing in the forest. According to him, they came in all shapes and sizes, ranging from the small gnomes, to frightening minotaurs, to the immense draconian wyverns. What if one of the creatures had gotten to them? Dread filled the small pink-haired child as he continued searching for his parents, the cold rain pelting him all over the body. Yet, he still held strong, he still pushed forward, not wanting to stop until he found his family safe and sound. "Mommy, Daddy." He called out to them once again, unknowingly alerting one of the residents as he passed by, a large, adult wyvern on the hunt. A shrill shriek pierced the night, scaring the living daylights out of the tiny boy. He spun around, his eyes darting from place to place at very fast speeds. He futilely tried to silence his frantic breathing, finally deciding to cover his mouth with his hand. Unbeknownst to him, the fierce, terrifying creature loomed its scaly head right above him. Vaguely wondering why the rain had stopped where he was standing, he froze completely when he heard low, rough breathing from right behind him. He turned around slowly and lifted his head, locking eyes with large, serpentine red ones. Lightning flashed, showing the visage of the otherworldly creature. It shrieked, hitting the boy with a gale of putrid breath. The child could only scream in fright and run as the creature reared its head and struck at him, digging deeply into the ground. As fast as his small legs could carry him, he ran deeper into the forest, not caring whether the creature was behind him or if other creatures had joined the chase. He could only hear the sound of flapping wings getting closer, adding even more adrenaline fuel into his small body, propelling it at speeds he didn't think possible. Lightning flashed in the sky in a furious arcing dance of ethereal beauty. It lit the boy's path through the incessant rain, providing natural assistance on the frantic race for survival. The familiarly terrifying shriek rang out once again, this time seemingly closer than before. The child was panicking. If he was caught by the wyvern, then he was dead meat, lunch for the dragon-like creature. His small bones would be used as toothpicks for picking off the leftover meat stuck in the maw of the beast. Another shriek pierced the night, but this time, it was right above him. The wyvern landed right in front of him in a loud, earth-shaking crash, making the boy stumble and fall on his rear. He grimaced in slight pain, the brunt of it being numbed by the adrenaline flowing through his blood vessels. The beast raised a hideously sharp-clawed hand, ready to seize the child. Adrenaline-powered reflexes allowed the boy to scrape an evasion as he jumped to the side, the whoosh of the claw grinding at his right ear. The other claw came down, and it would have struck him had lightning not flashed and alerted the pink-haired boy of its approach. Darting right under the creature's arm as the claw sunk into the ground, the child jumped over a peculiarly protuberant root and made his way down what seemed to be a hill. The beast roared in apparent frustration at not successfully capturing him, but he sure as hell was not going to stop and prove that statement. He continued running, ducking under low branches and jumping over the occasional exposed root. The rainstorm seemed to lessen slightly, allowing improved visibility that only increased further every time lightning flashed. He spotted a large cave at the edge of his sight when lightning flashed for the 100th time that painstakingly long, yet short evening. Almost screaming in relief, the boy climbed up roots and rocks, grinding his small fingers into the unforgiving terrain, unknowingly drawing small amounts of blood. He clambered unceremoniously into the cave, heaving for life-sustaining oxygen. Without another word, he collapsed, his eyes swimming slightly in dizziness. He was beyond exhaustion, to the point where his muscles would not respond to his brain signals. He managed to wheeze, shivering slightly at the cold that had finally manifested itself in his heated body. His eyes drooped ever so slightly, the needed sleep wanting to overwhelm him. Only for a piercing shriek to reverberate throughout the entire cave, snapping him completely into full awareness. He did not even need to look at the entrance of the cave to know he was in a heap of trouble. That trouble took the form of a bloodthirsty, man-eating wyvern that was purposefully lumbering towards him. 4 more shrieks sounded into the night, bringing the child's fear to even higher levels. There were more of them. The commotion had attracted the rest, and now, they were converging on their next late-night snack. The boy managed to prop himself on his elbows and inch backwards, trying to get away from the creatures, but the effort was futile. The lead wyvern was already a few meters away from him, boring through him with its hellish red eyes. He could feel the creature's putrid breath invading his sense of smell, threatening to suffocate him should he continue to breathe it. "I'm dead," he thought, a small tear forcing its way out of his closed eyes. "I will be food for that big lizard. Sorry for being a bad boy, Mommy, Daddy." But then, the unthinkable happened. An immense ray of pale blue light raced from the confines of the cave and crashed into the wyvern, making it shriek in arduous pain. The ground shook terribly, dislodging a few of the rocks and raining them on the cavern floor. Not even a second later, it was flung out the cavern's entrance, completely incinerated and electrocuted. The wyvern was dead. The child's onyx eyes were as wide as they could go. He could feel his pink hair standing on end throughout the entirety of his head. His body was frozen in place, the shock was too strong, no pun intended. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" A deep, grave, inhuman voice reverberated from within the cave's darkness, startling the young boy even further. Painstakingly slowly he turned his head in that direction, only to almost scream in fear once again. There, in the overbearing darkness enhanced by the night, were draconian eyes of a shining golden yellow color. The ground began to quake rhythmically as the eyes made their slow approach. Screeching increased in volume and frequency, a sign of the increasing number of wyverns at the cave's entrance. There was an electrifying feeling in the air, and the boy pinned it on the creature those powerfully terrifying eyes belonged to. Lightning flashed as it exited the cave, finally revealing who it was that saved the frightened boy, a gargantuan dragon. It roared into the night, the sound very reminiscent of roaring thunder. Lightning flashed for an extended period of time, almost as if it were in sync with the mighty dragon's roar. The wyverns spread their wings, shrieking in defiance, and attacked. The battle that ensued, as one-sided as it was an unforgettable one. It started off with the dragon taking in an immensely deep breath, the lightning from the sky apparently drawn toward its mouth. There, an orb of pale blue electricity came into existence, swelling into a size so great it filled the entirety of the dragon's open jaw. It released the orb, becoming a massive beam of pure electricity that raced across the horizon at speeds only known to lightning itself. The dragon redirected the attack, the entirety of the beam moving across the landscape as it followed the direction its jaw pointed, striking down two of the wyverns. A series of massive electrical explosions ensued, closely following each other as if they were a humongous chain. Dust and smoke rose high into the air, visible thanks to the sputtering flames that had emerged from the large arcs of electricity that struck sporadically. The group of wyverns, now numbering in the tens, roared and shrieked in defiance as they charged the majestic dragon. The dragon only arched its neck backward slightly as it slowly spread its beautiful, bat-like wings to their full wingspan. The boy was terrified of the appearance the dragon gave, and it wasn't directed towards him. His terror and surprise only grew when lightning struck the dragon, snaking its way around its large body. It began to flail its tail around like a whip, the electricity concentrating on the flexible limb. Without so much as a warning, the dragon launched itself into the air and snapped its tail on the group of wyverns multiple times, managing to slice about 5 of them cleanly in half. The boy desperately wanted to run, to get away from the inhuman fight, but his body screamed defiance. His muscles were tired and sore. He was cold, and he knew that if he got out of the cave, he would be subjected to the freezing rain and the sharp fangs of the draconian creatures. He couldn't help but be mesmerized by the scene before him. The fluid way the dragon moved was an immense contrast to the size it boasted. None of its attacks were wasted, as each one had struck down a certain number of the man-eating wyverns. But it didn't last long. Suddenly, a bolt of electricity originating from the tail arched its way towards the boy. He noticed it too late. A scream of pain escaped his lips as the lightning struck him smack dab in the center of his chest, electrocuting and slightly burning him. "I'm sorry, Mommy." The last thing he saw before darkness took him were electrifying golden yellow draconian eyes and a slew of fleeing wyverns. Sunlight invaded the darkness of the cave, unceremoniously striking and waking the previously unconscious child. His eyes fluttered open, but he quickly closed them when the bright light filtered into his ocular channels. Groaning softly and wondering why his body hurt so terribly, he sat up from the oddly warm stone floor. Then, the reality of his situation hit him. He was not home. He was in a large cave in the middle of the forest of Metso, probably very far away from his home village, home to a dragon. Eyes wide in a comical fashion, he robotically turned around, only for his eyes to stumble upon the sleeping form of the creature that had saved his life. "Kaya," he squeaked rather girlishly as he jumped back, waking it up in a start. "DD dragon, damn it, brat. I'm trying to sleep here." When the dragon had faced him, he accidentally bore his teeth upon the jumpy child, scaring him even further. "PP please don't eat me, MRD dragon," he shakily begged, covering his face with both of his hands. I don't eat children, kid. Not enough meat. Besides, humans taste bad." Really? You won't eat me?" he asked, unknowingly releasing a held breath in relief. "Yes, kid. I mean it. Thank you, Mr. Dragon." The boy thanked the majestic creature, finally opening his eyes and getting a good look at his savior. The dragon could be called beautiful, in its own, dangerous way. It was enormous, that was obvious. Its scales were of a captivating royal blue color, while its underside was of opale silver color. It had a triangular head, with a snout that held rows upon rows of impossibly sharp teeth, joined to a long, slender neck that boasted a row of severely sharp spikes that pointed backwards. Its body was lean, for a dragon. The majestic bat-like wings were folded on top of its back. Its forelegs were not stubby, but long and lean, with incredible muscle tone, ending with 5-fingered extremities that held very sharp, royal blue claws. Its whip-like tail was very much like its neck, with a row of small spikes running down the top. "Don't mention it, kid, what's your name?" the boy asked nervously. "Me? Why, I am the one and only Raggio, king of all lightning dragons that roam Earthland." The boisterously boastful way the now-named Raggio introduced himself, together with a swish of its tail in a grandiose manner, caught the boy off guard, making him slightly gape. "And you, kid. It was only when the dragon directed its inquiry at him that he managed to snap out of his night trance." "What? Me?" asked the boy rather dumbly. "Of course, kid. You and I are the only living souls in this cave." The deadpan tone the dragon seemingly had served to completely sober up the kid. "Oh, my name's Natsu," the now-named Natsu stuttered. "Natsu, nice name you got there, kid." "Thank you," muttered Natsu shyly, his cheeks pinking slightly. "Where are your parents?" That singular question had an overwhelmingly negative effect on young Natsu, for his smile disappeared and his shoulders seemed to sag slightly in response. I don't know," he whispered despairingly, though Raggio heard it clearly. "How did you end up here, anyways?" "The forest is a rather dangerous place for tiny kids like you." There was an odd fluctuation in Raggio's tone of voice, almost giving an impression of genuine concern for the pink-haired boy. Natsu remained downtrodden, still not looking up at those piercing electric orbs Raggio had for eyes. "My mommy and daddy left without telling me anything. They always do, so I thought something bad happened to them. I looked everywhere in the village where I live, but they were not there. So, I came here, since daddy always told me he came to hunt here," Natsu explained. "So, they abandoned you." Natsu flinched at the usage of such a strong word. He may just be a 5-year-old boy, but he knew what the word abandoned meant, the epitome of a child's fears. It wasn't the dark, it wasn't a man-eating wyvern. And it surely wasn't a lightning dragon king. It was being abandoned by his parents. That was his greatest fear. He lowered his head slightly, tears slipping through his closed eyelids. Whether they were from fear, anger or sadness, he didn't know. His emotions, surprisingly, were far too mixed up to even tell one from the other. "I guess that he did," he managed to choke out before breaking down in a small fit of sobs. Raggio could only look at the boy with sympathy. Being abandoned by a parent was never a good thing, especially at his age. He grew thoughtful for a moment. He greatly considered raising the boy himself, since, after that night 100 years ago, there was nothing better for him to do. What held him back, though, was the unfortunate fact that his time in the world of the living was limited. He did not want to inflict the pain of unwarned departure on Natsu once again. He wouldn't be able to live with himself, alive or dead. He couldn't help but growl lowly in anger at the events of that rainy night. He cursed himself for being so brash and thinking he could take down Acnologia, the Dragon King, by himself, and now, as a result of that, he was stuck in the middle of this cave as his eventual deathbed. That dragon was something special, terrifyingly and regrettably so. He failed to see that before they clashed. He failed to see that to bring it down, he would need someone as special as him. He looked down at young Natsu, wanting to curse himself for the thoughts that ran through his mind. He shook his head internally. Damn all the consequences. If his parents weren't responsible enough to raise the child themselves, then he would do it. He would teach him everything he knew. All of the knowledge he held in his mind and books stashed away in the cave, and best of all, his magic. Yes, he could see the potential little Natsu held within the confines of his tiny body. When he accidentally struck him with his lightning a few days ago, something incredible happened. At first, he screamed in pain, but when his consciousness had seemingly slipped, the lightning began to arch around his tiny body slowly, almost reverently. It touched upon his extremities, slipping into his hands, feet, and head. However, the highest concentration of the lightning slipped into his torso, right where it struck. Raggio could not contain his surprise. That showed an affinity for lightning magic that was off the charts, a kind of affinity only seen in the most masterful of wizards or lightning dragons. To be able to subconsciously control such an unstable element as lightning in such a way required years of concentration. Possibly decades, yet it was done by an unconscious 5-year-old boy. His decision had already been made for him. He would raise the boy to be the greatest dragon slayer in existence, greater than Acnologia himself before he became a dragon, a lightning dragon slayer. Master of one of the greatest forces of nature. Natsu, how does me raising you sound to you? He voiced. He had to ask. After all, the boy had a choice. Why you would, raise me? Natsu shakily asked, his eyes glowing with expectation and a tinge of apprehension. And teach you everything I know, from writing to reading. Every bit of knowledge that resides in this cave will be yours. Plus, I will teach you my magic. I'm going to learn all that cool stuff you did yesterday, he gushed gleefully, the giddiness obvious in his eyes. Raggio couldn't help but smile at the child's energetic glee. Actually, you've been asleep for a few days. Ehh, he screamed, his eyes comically wide. Raggio chuckled, a low, growling rumble that escaped his throat. He quickly sobered from his fit, looking at Natsu seriously as he lowered his head to his level. So, Natsu, what do you say? Would you let me raise you? Can a dragon raise a human? Natsu asked, innocent onyx locking with fierce golden yellow. I've never done it myself, but it has been done. Okay, then. Yeah, teach me all the cool stuff, Natsu cheered happily, jumping and hugging Raggio's snout tightly. But then, he jumped off, an apparent serious expression on his face. Wait, why raise me? Raggio looked thoughtful for a moment, but quickly had an answer. Growing without a parent is something no child should ever go through, especially one your age. I won't let that happen to you. Also, you have immense magical reserves for a child your age, and an affinity for lightning magic only seen in master wizards or lightning dragons. You possess extreme potential, and I, for some odd reason, feel compelled to help you reach that potential. He trailed off when he noticed Natsu staring at him blankly, a sign of him not understanding anything that was said. He sighed loudly before saying, Look, I want to raise you because I want to. Okay. Oh okay, was all little Natsu replied. Suddenly, his stomach growled loudly. Blushing red in embarrassment, he snaked his arms around his belly, saying, I'm hungry. After we eat, start teaching me. Raggio's sweat dropped. What did I get myself into?